Genshin Impact is a game that has matured to the point that we can definitely say which elements are better than others. And I know y'all tier list frogs out there want some more tier lists, so today we'll be ranking the 6 elements of Genshin Impact from worst to best. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening YouTube, it's your Slime King, the Gma Man, and welcome to another video. Let's get right into it. The worst element in the game is Geo. Geo is an element that reacts with all other elements except Anemo, producing the reaction called Crystallize. Crystallize is a shield that strength is based on the elemental mastery of the unit proccing the reaction. I don't need to get into this too deep, but building EM on Geo units doesn't do anything except increase the shield strength of Crystallize. And that very same EM doesn't even scale that well on Geo units. It's already useless except for that shield strength niche. And even in that niche, it is terrible. If you've ever used Shat Beto, then you know that EM is as useless as a stat as it can truly get for Geo units. To add to this, the Resonance strengthens the idea that you must only run Geo characters. This is the only element in the game that is solely based on running triple or mono element teams. You combine that with their relatively inert reaction, and it's easy to see why Geo is the worst element, and that's coming from a Geo main. The second worst element in the game is Pyro. I know, I bet you're surprised to see the great and mighty DPS element so low on this list, but let me tell you why. If Geo was the most inert and static reaction, then Pyro is the most one-dimensional reaction in the game. Pyro is half the equation to Vapes and Melts. That's a 1.5 times multiplier for Vapes and a 2 times multiplier for Melts. This reaction is good and is used by some of the most popular DPSs in the game. However, that is all it is, a reaction that does more damage. The Pyro Resonance literally just gives attack. There is no added utility or buffs like the other elements that I will get into later. And then we look at Overload. Once upon a time, Electro was deemed as the worst element in the game because Overload was such a bad reaction that made your opponents fly away from you so fast that you'd mistake them for a seagull's sperm in heat charging straight into that Cleoka. Well, Pyro is also one half of that reaction, and Overload in reality is only just more damage that it is sometimes bad when fighting mobs of enemies and neutral when fighting bigger enemies. I'll get into the specifics of Overload with the next element, but it's not hard to see that now Pyro is the second worst element in the game. Next up on the list, and logically, it's Electro. Now, I deem Electro as a baseline for a reaction. Electro, in my opinion, is a perfectly balanced element that has 2 really good reactions and 1 situationally neutral one. Why? Because with the options that Electro has, it can situationally fit into many contexts depending on what you're trying to achieve. I've talked about Overload before with Pyro, and most of the reason why Electro is in this spot is because of Overload. Overload has its uses particularly when trying to stagger larger enemies. However, its downsides make it a well-balanced reaction because you actually have to think about when you are using this reaction. And putting that choice on the player is a good thing. Superconduct is basically the physical version of BB, and Electro is one half of that reaction. Need I say more? And lastly, Electro Charged. Strap in, boys, it's going to be a long one. Electro Charged is a broken reaction because it deals a ton of damage over a period of time, and it allows 2 elements to coexist on an enemy. Its numbers are small, but it adds up due to the sheer nature of the units that are using them. And that is by design. Beto's multipliers might not seem that high, but due to her multiple hits from her burst, she applies Electro at a very fast rate, besides dealing a ton of damage. Fischl applies a ton of Electro as well from Oz, then you take into account her Ascension passive that also adds more damage in C6, which is another source of Electro. Yaemiko has consistent Electro application as well. All this adds up to a situation where you can proc Electro Charged consistently. Now, building EM for Electro Charged reactions is not recommended because generally, there is inconsistency on who procs this because of the same said nature. It also staggers enemies like Ruin Guards and Ruin Graders, adding further utility. And now we can finally talk about the only instance where Hydro and Electro coexist, allowing Anemo to swirl both elements and allowing Pyro to both vape and overload at the same time. An Anemo unit will always trigger the Electro Charge reaction, and EM is the best build for most Anemo characters. So the synergy this reaction has with Anemo makes it a really good situational reaction. The cherry on top of all of this is Electro Resonance. A lot of people give flack for how bad this resonance is, but the reality is this resonance provides a ton of energy over a period of time. 1 electro particle every 5 seconds is a utility for energy generation that no other element can provide. It's not hard to see why electro is where it is. Electro is situationally very good, and I consider that as the baseline for an element. It is not exactly broken, but its reactions give the players a freedom of choice, knowing that there are pros and cons to each one of its reactions. Speaking of broken, let's talk about the next element, Cryo. Now this element is a little bit more simple than Electro. We've talked about the utility of Superconduct already, but what makes Cryo broken is its Resonance, Melt, and Freeze reactions. The Resonance provides 15% crit rate when affected by Cryo, and in a game gated by RNG, being provided with one of the most sought after stats in the game is really good. Melt is a straight up 1.5 times damage multiplier that's always nice to have, and then you have the Freeze reaction, which is the most broken reaction in the game. There's a reason why Ayaka and Ganyu dominate so much of the meta today. It's because when an enemy can be frozen, they can't deal damage to you, and you can literally just stand there wailing at them. I lashed out at Pyro for being so one-dimensional, and Cryo is a good reason why. Cryo has a buffing reaction in Superconduct, a damaging reaction in Melt, and a utility reaction in Freeze. There are no downsides to its reactions like Electro. I dare say that because Freeze is so high up there, that even if Cryo doesn't do any other reaction but Freeze, I would still say it would still be in this spot. Now we're getting to the big boys, the top 2 elements in Genshin Impact. The second best element in the game is Anemo. You don't need to have a big brain to figure out why Anemo is in this spot, but let me tell you why anyway. It buffs everything in the game with VV except Geo, but Geo is a bad reaction anyway. It helps maintain or change the elemental aura in an enemy. It is the only element in the game with innate grouping built into its units. And with the 1.6 patch changes, Swirl deals so much damage now that it is a viable DPS solution. Anemo can double swirl enemies affected by Electrocharge, furthering that point. There's literally no downside to the Anemo unit, and it fits into almost every team. And that is why it is the second best element. If it's not obvious by now, I'll tell you. The best element of the game is Hydro. Its 3 reactions help make it the ultimate enabler. Vapes are a 2 times multiplier when Hydro hits Pyro. Hydro is 1/2 of Electrocharge reactions. I've already talked about how good Electrocharge is in certain situations. And Hydro is also 1/2 of Freeze. And we all know how broken Freeze is by now. I've explained just how good these reactions already are. Therefore, Hydro is literally half the best reactions in the game. This is the reason why Kokomi is so good despite her rather tumultuous reception at launch. This is why Child is part of the strongest team internationally. And this is why Mona to this day gets usage even if the only team worth running for her is Morgana. And Barbara has some use cases in Ayaka Freeze as well. And Sincho is the sole reason why Hoyoverse is so reluctant to release another Hydro with his amount of Hydro application. No matter how bad a Hydro unit may seem, the element will always bring it up. Off-field Hydro application is one of the most valuable assets a character can have. With that skill, you have access to Vapes, Electrocharged, and Freeze. There's no debate. Hydro is the best element in the game. I'm not going to talk about Dendro today, as it is not released, and dreams are unreliable in gauging just how good an element is. I do not trust opinions of dreamers because I think they do not have enough understanding of the game to tell me just how good it truly is. Am I right? Any violent chatters out there? Let me know in the comments down below, or better yet, come at me at twitch.tv/DojimaMan, where I stream Genshin almost every day. This is our parting. Bask in the limelight of my tier list. Farewell.